Welcome everybody. My name's Gillian Preece and I'm a senior business consultant with ADAS in the West Midlands and Wales. Today we're going to talk about building a resilient farm business. And the first thing I'd like to do is to talk you through about 6 important factors or aspects to any successful business, not just one in farming. We're then going to spend a bit of time talking to James Dunn, who's a farmer, about how he's applied these business principles within his own farm. So what do we mean by resilience? The word resilience describes the ability of somebody or something to recover from or easily adjust to a misfortune or a change which happens. It's really important that we understand the word resilience because it's absolutely critical to us as people and also within our businesses. If you're managing a farm business, you should really be thinking about your business as a business leader would think about their business. There is a definition in New Zealand called a lifestyler, and in this country we tend to call them smallholders. We're really not talking about people who are farming for fun or for enjoyment. We're really thinking about farm business as something which makes you money and funds a lifestyle. And in order to have a successful business, we think there are 6 important factors. Firstly, measuring to improve performance. And I'll talk about all these points in a little bit more detail in a minute. Secondly, to look forward, to think about the future of the business and where it's going. Thirdly, to turn any challenges into an opportunity for the business rather than just being a problem. Fourthly, to take a collaborative view, so to work as a team. To value diversity in a business. And then finally, to think about change as the default, as something that always happens, not just occurs to you. So firstly, if you're managing a farm business, you should think as a business leader would about measuring to improve performance. This means really about to collect and to use data to stimulate change within your business and to drive improvements within your business. Farmers are quite familiar with performance recording, but recording for recording's sake is not really very useful. It's really important that those figures that we measure, even if it's something as simple as knowing how many lambs we've sold per ewe in the last 12 months, or how many beef suckler cows got in calf in the last 12 months cycle, or how much milk we sold, or how much grain we sold. Even those figures are performance recording, and they can be compared to previous years, or compared to our budget, or compared to other businesses. Many farm businesses are now using accounts software for online VAT submissions. Any business with over £85,000 worth of turnover in a year have to do this, and many more who are below that threshold are already doing it. But how many people and how many businesses are just using those software programs to submit their VAT returns and not actually making any money back from the cost that it involves to do that? If the appropriate coding structures are used within those programs, they enable a much deeper interrogation of the performance of the business and allow for things like benchmarking, proportional analysis of costs, either within your own business or between your business and other businesses, and also regular reporting of management information. With these software in place and the systems that we've now got available to us, we don't need to be looking back at accounts information which is 18 months or 12 months out of date. We can actually, at our fingertips, have a real life grasp on what's happening now on the farm. And a lot of the software programs also have the provision for forecasting and budgeting cash flows within that facility. So using that financial data to effect change and drive continual improvement on farm is what we mean by measuring performance and using it to improve our businesses. There's a variety of programs that are available to do the VAT returns and the accounts on farm. ADAS are in favour of zero and figured either independently or in collaboration with each other, because they offer a really good budgeting and cash flow capability, as well as just recording the actual ins and outs of income and expenditure. It's not just enough to do it that way in farming, because it's always been done that way. And the next important aspect to making your business resilient is actually to look forward, to plan, and to plan again. The objectives of business partners change from year to year, from generation to generation, and external factors also influence our businesses. Things such as climate change, a changing marketplace, and the forthcoming changes in agricultural support all influence our planning going forward. So when you're putting a plan together for your business, you need to try and answer the following questions. What do I want? What are my personal objectives? What are my business objectives? And this might be quite different to your personal objectives. This business objectives, sometimes I want to farm 500 acres, I want to make a maximum margin per acre, or I want more cows, or whereas personal objectives are more about time and family and sometimes money. Who are the stakeholders in your business? The business partners care about what the business does, but there are other people that have an inherent interest in whether your business is successful or not. People like your bank manager, your accountant, your wives, your children, your vet, your consultant. They all have an influence on your business, and they're all stakeholders and therefore need to be involved in some way in the plan going forward. You need to understand your customers and what their needs are. If your customers' needs change, then your business may need to adapt to meet those changes. And succession. I've mentioned children already as a stakeholder, but succession is a big factor in farm businesses and is often ignored or just not talked about because it's too uncomfortable. There are other things which affect businesses. I've already mentioned them: climate change and environmental pressures, and also the influence and for forthcoming Brexit, whether trade negotiations are successful or not, and what the subsidy changes that are coming will mean for your business. Those are all important things to try and get the answers to as you're putting your plan together. It's often useful as well at this stage to involve a third party in those discussions. Things like succession, what your objectives are, what your business objectives are. They're not always easy to talk about amongst business partners, and also finding the time to talk about them. If you set a meeting with a consultant or a third party accountant to actually have those conversations, it makes people sit around the table and start talking. And it's one thing that we spend quite a lot of time doing. So in addition to those questions that we've talked about, it might be useful to do a SWOT analysis, which looks at the strengths, the weaknesses, the opportunities and the threats that are integral to your business. Assess the risks that are on the horizon, whether that be Brexit trade talks reducing the price of your outputs, or whether that be somebody's ill health that you may know about. There's all sorts of risks that can be on the horizon for a business. Set some goals, some objectives, and that might take the form of key performance indicators, things like improving the output of calves per suckler cow, or the output of sheep per ewe, or the yield per hectare of your arable crops. And when you've set those key performance indicators and you've set some targets and you've got an idea how you might change things to get there, well, you can put that into a budget and a cash flow and see how the implications of those changes flow through into financial figures. And it may also be appropriate to be talking about staff management and have a staff management system in place, depending on how many people you employ. So the next few years are likely to be the most challenging that we've seen in agriculture for decades. The changes in agricultural support and the impact of Brexit and the increasing pressure on the environment mean that businesses which reduce their exposure to risk and can adapt quickly to changing situations are much more likely to be successful and to be able to come out of the other side in a stronger way. And this leads me on to the next aspect of making your business more resilient, which is turning that challenge and those challenges that we know are coming into opportunities. This means lessening the risk, reducing the exposure of your business to some of the things that you know are going to change, and adapting quickly to that new business environment. When you're thinking about turning challenges into opportunities, you need to really consider some of these points on here, and then I'll briefly show you a video which also helps to explain what we mean. So if you've got parts of the business that aren't performing as well as they should, then you need to address those parts of the business, and you can identify those by doing what we talked about earlier, which is interrogating your accounts software, or just looking in your diary and seeing what your outputs were. It depends how you record things on farm, but you need to identify the areas of the business that aren't doing as well as they should and try and address those. Also important is overhead costs. Often these are the way they are because they've always been that way, but it doesn't mean they can't be challenged and be looked at and analysed and driven down so that your business is fit for the future. That's a process that needs to happen before the challenges come, and that's critical so that their business is in a position to take advantage of the opportunities as and when they arrive, rather than being on the back foot. There may well be bargains to be had from the challenges that are coming. There may be opportunities to be considered, but they may not that may not have materialised without that adversity, without those challenges. So the video that we're going to show next is produced by a consultancy company called McKinsey, and this video really explains the difference between resilient businesses and their competitors. It's not specifically aimed at agricultural businesses, and it talks about all businesses, but the principles of what the video is showing really do apply, especially at a time of significant change within agriculture.
While economic forecasters debate when the next downturn will hit, the pressing question for business leaders isn't when, it's how to prepare for the next recession. To help answer that question, let's look at a group of companies we've dubbed the Resilients. The Resilients managed to not just survive, but thrive during the last downturn. They returned at least 9% more in total returns to shareholders than their industry peers. So how did they do it? Firstly, they reduced operating costs ahead of the downturn. This meant they brought far more cash to the battle. When the upswing began, the Resilients used this cash to acquire the assets their industry peers were dumping in fire sales. Next, they focused on preserving their growth engine to fuel post-recession organic growth. Their industry peers, on the other hand, made indiscriminate cuts across the board, limiting or delaying their ability to reignite their growth. These lessons are enduring, but all recessions are different. We believe the next generation of Resilients will be further along in their digital journeys and rely on the following playbook. They will capitalise on tech-enabled operations to get more from their assets, allocate resources more effectively, and improve their planning and budgeting processes. They will explore agile ways of working, deploying experts where and when they are needed. They will maintain customer loyalty, particularly in segments that are likely to be high growth after the recession. And finally, they will explore divestitures ahead of any downturn and use M&A during the upswing to generate growth and build capabilities. Companies that pull ahead of their peers, even slightly during downturns, gain an advantage that's tough to reverse when the economy picks up again. And while the debate about when continues among economic forecasters, one thing is clear: companies that move early tend to win.
So now that we've seen that video, hopefully it's clarified some of the points that I've already talked about measuring performance, looking forward and planning your business, turning challenge into opportunity. Another important factor is taking a collaborative view. That means involving everyone in your business and taking opportunities to work with others outside your business. When we're looking at collaboration, we need to be thinking about communicating the business plans with the people who we've talked about before, the stakeholders. So not just the business partners need to know what you're trying to achieve, but your vet, your accountant, your bank manager. Really important to get everybody that's in the team on the same wavelength so that you can work together to try and achieve the plan. Partnering with advisors, using people that you trust, and if appropriate, looking at things like joint farming ventures, looking at sharing equipment within machinery rings or a neighbour, using knowledge transfer, in being involved in discussion groups, sharing information, benchmarking not only within your own business but within groups of people who've got similar businesses to try and identify where you may be able to improve. It's often easier to see where improvements can be made by looking at others, not necessarily just continuing to do what you've always done. The fifth point then is to value diversity. This is about using, it may be useful at this stage to use external sources to identify the opportunities for diversification. Going forward, it may be better not to have all our eggs in one basket. Those businesses which have some diversified income streams are often more resilient when change happens. Quite often, if one aspect of agriculture is doing badly, another aspect will be doing quite well, another sector. Or it may be that a family needs to be in a situation where not all of the family income is reliant on the farm business. It may be that there's some outside income coming into the family to reduce the exposure to risk. Or it may be that there are opportunities to diversify in a more traditional way with farm shops, holiday lets, other income streams. However, it's really important that if you're thinking about doing any kind of diversification, that the skills are there within the farm business to do that. Any business, whether it's an agricultural business or retail business or other holiday let type businesses, there's a specific skill that's required. And for those businesses, diversified or core agricultural, to be successful, we need to make sure that the right skills are there. And if they aren't, then either consider something else or do some training. It's also important that the resources are there on the farm and that you utilise the resources that you've got to the best of your ability, really. It's quite important as well to consider whether you think you're a commodity producer or a value-added niche market producer. It may be that you can't do both, and commodity production is where you want to be, so you can focus on yield and output and expanding that route. Or if you're a value-added producer, that you decide to add the value but not on such a large scale. So the final aspect that needs considering with regard to being a resilient farm business is to make change a default, to make sure that change becomes normal. And it's also important to think that, to know that a series of smaller changes are actually often more achievable than one massive one-shot adjustment. And a good example of this is the Team Sky, the bike team who won the Tour de France on various occasions. And their approach was very much that every nanosecond, every millisecond that they could shave off a time was worth doing, even if it meant the riders had their own bedding in the hotel moved on before them, so they were always on the same sheets, the same pillow, their own smell, made them sleep better. And all those little things add up and technical performance of the bike. It's not one big thing that makes the difference between a winner and second place. It's little incremental changes. The grief cycle is you may be familiar with the grief cycle. The grief cycle is something that's talked about a lot when we're talking about bereavement, but it's also very relevant when we're talking about adapting to change within a business. It's the range of emotions that we progress through when we're challenged with a shock, whether that's a bereavement or whether it's just a significant shock to our business that's outside of our control. How quickly we react to that and how quickly we move through these stages of emotions affect then how much we're able to capitalize on it and to use the change that's, or the shock that's happened, to our advantage, to minimize the negative impact and to seek those opportunities. So when that shock first comes, Brexit, the knowledge that we're going to lose agricultural support in the way that we've been familiar with for the last few decades, first it's like, oh well, it probably won't happen, the UK will probably vote to stay in. And then there might be a bit of anger about, well, hang on a minute, I didn't really want that to happen. And then there might be some negative thoughts and some feelings of, well, crikey, what are we going to do now? It's all going to be doom and gloom and it's all going to come crashing around our ears. Then we move into a bargaining stage where we think, actually, maybe this is not actually too bad. Maybe we can deal with this. Then acceptance, well, it's going to happen now. So how are we going to deal with it? How are we going to adapt our business to take those opportunities? And how quickly, as businesses, we move through those stages really determines whether we're going to be able to take the opportunity that we can from change. So I've talked for long enough. Hopefully you're not too fed up of hearing my voice, but I'd like now to put a few questions to a farmer, to James Dunn, who has used these 6 principles, these aspects to making a business more resilient, and put them into practice. So just like to ask James a few questions. So I've talked for quite a while now, and I think it would be really useful if we could hear from a practical, down-to-earth farmer who has been putting some of these aspects into practice. James Dunn is a colleague of mine from ADAS, who also runs his own farm business and has agreed kindly to be interviewed to try and give some really practical explanations about how some of these changes to our businesses to make them more resilient can work. So James, to start with, really, could you just give us a brief description about the farm business that you run and who's involved, please?
Yeah, hello Gillian, and hello everybody out there. Thanks for the introduction. I think what you're talking about is really important in terms of a farm business and what we're doing at home. So we're actually across in North Lincolnshire, which is in arable country, but we're only a very small farm. So 150 acres over here is considered to be very small, and we're on the edge of the Lincolnshire Wolds. So we've got some really thin soils on the Lincolnshire Wolds, and we've got some loamy soils that run just off the Lincolnshire Wolds. Going back sort of 10 years. Just over 10 years, about 13 years now, we had a dairy herd, which again wasn't sort of the thing that you would have in northern Lincolnshire. It's more of a grass growing county type industry rather than something that would be found in North Lincolnshire, and really it's from a conversation that we had as a family, something like, I don't know, 15 years ago now, that we got to the position of thinking dairy herd wasn't for us. 4 boys, 2 of them not really interested in farming at all, 2 massively interested in farming, but not interested in milking cows both ends of the day, every day of the week. So there was a little bit of sadness, because we'd had the dairy herd for 50 years, and it was something that letting go of, with all the history and generations before us, it was difficult. But obviously there was no future in it because the next generation weren't interested. So we made the decision to sell the cows. We went sort of contractors and arable for a long time, sort of 7 years, and then we started on a strategy of looking at different enterprises, and we now have a livery yard, which I thought we'd never have, because horses weren't really my thing, and we have an ever-growing herd of stabilizer suckler cows, and we also have a bed and breakfast pig unit with 1,000 pigs. So yeah, it's been a bit of a story so far, and obviously there's an awful lot more to do going forward.
Okay, thank you for that. When I did the first half of this webinar and a bit of a presentation, my first point really was about measuring performance. Farmers are becoming more familiar with measuring performance, but what do we really mean by that? And can you give a sort of practical example of how that's worked within your own business in terms of developing the business?
Yeah, I mean, I think we on the farm look at this in two ways, really. We look at it in terms of the technical performance, key performance indicators. So things like with the suckler cows, we weigh all calves at birth, we weigh all calves at weaning, and we weigh fattening cattle every 2 to 3 weeks during the fattening period. So those are the sort of technical parameters that we sort of set some KPIs around, and we try to get, most of the animals hitting those target weights. With the pigs, because it's a bed and breakfast setup, it's very geared towards repetition, and but everything's monitored in terms of the number of deaths, in terms of some mortality rates are measured, feed rates are constantly measured, and we're bonused on it. So again, there's some real strong technical measuring going on both those enterprises. But the other side is the financial. So at the end of the day, when we're doing all this work, we need to be demonstrating that we're making money. Yeah. And so we allocate costs in every enterprise that we've got, and we try to allocate every single cost to an enterprise, and that's not easy, because things like labor, and you have people crossing over, and you have one tractor and it's working, one forklift and it's working on the pigs and it's working on the cattle, and so it's not easy to do. But we use some software to be able to allow us to do that, which auto allocates, and so some of those more overhead type costs we set up with rules within the programs that we use to auto allocate it, and most of it's based on turnover. So we have, on a percentage of turnover, we'll allocate those costs that are more difficult to allocate. Things like the variable costs, feed, and some of the labor, because our labor is actually quite distinct in terms of the different enterprises. But those sort of costs that are easy to allocate, we do, on a per enterprise basis as they go through the accounts. Yeah. But the other ones, we just set up rules to auto allocate them on percentage of turnover.
So you're talking about allocating fixed costs, not just variable costs to a gross margin level. You're talking about a full breakdown of costs.
Well, what we really want to understand is what the cost of production is. And our way of thinking around this is, if we don't do all of that, all of those fixed costs just get lost in a big pile. And yeah. So we try to allocate everything as much as possible to get to a cost of production, all the way down to the level other than family labour, which on our farm, the family labour is all paid for labour, so it's all allocated anyway. Right. But me working off the farm, any work I do on the farm at weekends and things doesn't get billed. But yeah, I don't do a lot of that now.
Yeah. Okay, thanks. So in the next aspect we were talking about earlier was planning and planning for the future. How does your business plan for the future, and how often do you review that plan?
Yeah, well, like I say, it started with that conversation when my boys are now sort of mid-20s and early 30s, but it started with a conversation sort of 15 years ago when they were in their teens, really, in terms of what we were going to do, because at that point we had to invest a lot of money into the dairy herd. We needed new concrete on silage clamps, we needed new cubicles, we needed a new slurry store, and there's probably anywhere between £300,000 and £500,000 to spend. So that's where it started in terms of the planning, and then going on from that, we then had the strategy in terms of how we diversify and how we build a business that was going to be future fit and resilient for the next generation. So the two boys that wanted to farm, we had to be able to provide enough on 150 acres for two families, essentially, based on the fact that I'm working for ADAS and earning outside of the business. But in terms of that planning, so we have a strategic plan that we try to well, it is written down, because I think it needs to be written down, and it's not sort of something that we just hide away in a cupboard when we've done it. It's kept,
cobwebs.
Yeah, exactly. It's kept out there for people to continue to discuss, and the other person to discuss with is those other people, with the stakeholders within the business. So we do rely on the banks quite heavily, and so communicating with the banks and letting them know the direction of our business is really important. So part of that planning is the financials. So being able to budget and produce a budget that the bank's happy with, and it may be that the overdraft goes up at certain times, but it's shown to come down, and then banks get confident in how you're going to do it. In terms of those review meetings, I would say we had one last weekend actually, because it's now lad got married and his wife runs our livery yard, so she's now part of the business. So we had a sit down last week to discuss going forward in terms of how things are working.
Great. Yeah, I think that review part of the plan is really important, because if it is just shoved in the cupboard in the corner and left to gather dust, and nobody's really engaged with it or thinks about it again, and also to write it down at all, because some people will say they've got a plan, but actually unless you sort of really put it down on paper, it's not enough really.
And things change, I mean, saying about the eldest son getting married, I mean, they've now got a little boy, so things change, don't they? Markets change, and so you do need to keep looking at it and thinking if it's still the right course to be on.
Absolutely. Can you give us an example, thinking about the fact that things change, and we're looking at a fairly challenging time potentially coming with all the things externally that are changing within our industry? Can you think of an example that you can give to the listeners about how your business has turned a challenge that it's had into an opportunity in the past?
Yeah, I mean, it goes back to the dairy cows again, because obviously we had to change, we had to do something different, we had to generate more income, and we had to intensify in a way. So changing from something that was just a commodity produced item, as in milk, into now what we've got. We've got livery income, which is very well, it's dependent on customers. All our businesses are dependent on customers, but they are very
volatile.
They're very in your face, and you see them every day, and if you don't keep them happy, then they will go.
Yeah.
So we've got those sort of people that we've got to look at. But the other thing is having the stabilizer suckler herd, got those on board because of their efficiency. Having been a consultant for a few years, I always considered that suckler cows were a bit of a challenge in terms of making money, but we think we can make money out of them, and we're expanding that side of the business. The B&B pigs, working with a very global supply chain, if you like, because we don't own the pigs and because we don't buy the feed, we have very low risk. We've got a labour input, we've got a big capital input, so we spend a lot of money putting that shed up, but it'll be paid for within 10 years, and we shall have a good income stream that is quite resilient. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does, and it's also possibly an answer to the next one, which is really to do with collaborations, about how collaboration with others might have helped you to improve your business. And I guess that's that relationship with the pig company is a collaboration of sorts, isn't it?
So yeah, so there's all sorts of people you need to collaborate with, because there's customers. So having that relationship is really important. Collaborating with your bank is really important, and having that, having the confidence to be able to take on different enterprises, you need to have a strong relationship with your banker. You need to have that relationship with the accountant. So you talked about, how often we review the plan. We have had, this a couple of years ago now, we had a succession meeting, and the accountant chaired the succession meeting, and we had all the boys in for that. So we sort of planned out what we're trying to do going forward with them, as well as others. But yeah, so the collaboration, but it can also be about collaborating with local farmers. So we work a lot with local farmers, sharing kit. Post knocker would be one example, and we'll go and do some work on their farm, and they come and do. And I'm sure a lot of farmers do that, to be honest. I think there's a lot more collaboration goes on than people probably, they don't see it as collaboration, they just see it as helping eat out, and that's sort of what we do.
Yeah. Okay, thanks. You've explained some of the different income streams that the business has got. How did you initially identify those opportunities, possibly thinking about the livery particularly, and did you have any help to develop those ideas?
So I was always told, and always have told people, that you should always, if you're going to diversify, you need to have the right skills, and you need to have some financial backing, and so I always thought when we closed down the dairy herd, the collecting yard would make a great area for stabling, and it was a great idea, and I sort of had that idea, but until we had my daughter-in-law come on board, who has got a degree in equine management, until she came on board, I was very reluctant to do it. But now I've got her part of the business and paid as a salaried employee, so she runs that livery yard. I have nothing to do with it, and so I think it's really important that you have those skill sets. The pigs sort of came about because I'd heard about them, and I recognised it as a really risk averse type of enterprise. Yes, big capital investment, but good payback period, and something that we could do, and we could use the muck on the farm, and we had the straw availability, which I'm sure is more of a challenge in Wales, but it's not a lot of straw. It's not ridiculous amounts of straw.
Yeah.
So really, that was where we came from with those.
Okay, thanks. Finally, the final aspect that I briefly touched on in my presentation was change and our attitudes to change. Has change come easily for all the partners in your business? And if not, how have you tackled or overcome that? I know it's something a lot of businesses struggle with, particularly when perhaps younger generations want to make changes, and the older generation aren't quite so keen. Maybe that's not the same in your business, but.
Look, change is the worst thing because nobody wants to change, because it's just human nature that you're more comfortable doing what you've always done.
Yeah.
But I think if you really want to grasp the nettle and take up opportunities where others see challenges, you have to be able to change. And you talked about that, the grief cycle. That is really true. It's really true. As you think back into some of the changes that we've applied on the farm, we've gone through all of that cycle exactly. But I mean, the other thing is, it's not just about you as the farmer or the business owner. It's about everybody being able to change, because everybody has a different behavior. Everybody has different attitudes to change. And that can vary age, and it can vary in terms of what background people are from. But nobody likes change. But once it's talked through and you understand why you're doing it, you can focus on, on the how you're going to get out of it. But I think the overriding message, and anybody that said to me, you've gone through this change and you've come out the other side, you're always changing. It should be, I think you said in your presentation, it should be the norm, it should be the default. And it is, because, who knew when we set off with the pigs and we set off with the horse livery, we didn't know anything about Brexit coming along. We didn't, I wanted to be more resilient. I wanted to make sure we could survive without BPS, because I didn't ever see that we should rely on it. But, having to change as we've changed is not easy. And if anybody says change is easy, they're lying, because it's not. It's difficult. It's difficult. Okay,
great. Well, I think that's really helped, hopefully, the people who are listening to really understand how the practical implementation of those stages of making your business resilient can work. And you've given us some really good examples there, James. So thank you ever so much for that. Finally, I'd really just like to summarise and just say that, just to reiterate those 6 points really, and that is that we need to be measuring performance within our business and using that to drive change. We need to be looking forward to the future and planning for the future. We need to turn the challenges that we're facing at the moment into opportunities, and not just look at them as negatives. We need to get everybody on board to take a collaborative view, to work with all the people that have got an interest in our business, not just the business partners. We need to put some value on diversity. Having all our eggs in one basket is a vulnerable place to be, and it's important that we try and spread our income streams out, or reduce our exposure to risk. And finally, and you've just talked about it, change isn't easy, but it needs to be the norm. It needs to be the default, that we embrace change and use it as to develop our businesses, and not just stick in the same place as we've been for the last 5, 10, 15 or 20 years. So lovely. Thank you ever so much for your time, James. Thank you everybody for listening. Goodbye.
Thank you. Goodbye.